The original version of the fiscal impact model required jurisdictions not only to invest their money, but an inordinate amount of time just to establish the model before they could use it. Both of these prerequisites, time and money, we felt inhibited the adoption of the fiscal impact model by many jurisdictions. Fiscal Impact Model 2.0 is a far more formidable tool for jurisdictions to use, as you will see. 2.0 dramatically reduces the amount of time a jurisdiction must employ before they can use the model. And also, we are offering the model to jurisdictions at no cost. The Fiscal Impact Model fits OKI's widely respected strategic policy plan because it offers jurisdictions a guide in land use decisions by identifying cost and revenue estimates of those changes in land use. In essence, the Fiscal Impact Model strives to be a trusted data point or a trusted data set for jurisdictions to employ in making land use decisions. It is our strong belief, and I'm sure it's one that you share, that the Fiscal Impact Model is best used when creating plans and not trying to apply it as development projects come down the pike seriatim. 2.0 allows additional flexibility to add new land uses and to consider school districts, which we think were significant omissions in the earlier version. In closing, it should be apparent, but I require to say that the Fiscal Impact Model cannot be a sole source to a jurisdiction making land use decisions. However, we firmly believe that the Fiscal Impact Model 2.0 can be a valued and a unique resource, a valued and a unique service to OKI jurisdictions. Without further ado, I want to introduce Andy Meyer, who is our Senior Land Use Planner at OKI and the driving force behind the creation of OKI's Fiscal Impact Model 2.0. Andy?
All right, thank you, Mark. As Mark said, I'm Andy Meyer, and the FIAM program is one of the projects that I inherited when I arrived at OKI 5 years ago. Seconding Mark's mention of our partnership with UC at the beginning, I feel it necessary to acknowledge Drs. Von Hoffe and Offrey as well. They've been very generous with their time in entertaining my questions and helping me to understand the inner workings of the FIAM model. My portion of the presentation will be a general overview of how the model works and how the results should be applied in a planning situation. First, this slide will give an overview of what the model is designed to do. The model is an Excel workbook, and those of you who are familiar with the FIAM program in the past may remember that we operated a web-based model. Moving to an Excel-based model is one of the big shifts we've made in the structure of the FIAM program, and I'll touch on why we've made that shift a little later in my presentation. Next, the model is designed to test multiple scenarios. Again, this is an area where we've intentionally shifted the focus of the program. Early on, the FIAM program was more oriented towards providing a measure of fiscal impact of development projects that were up for planning commission or zoning review, projects that were much closer to breaking ground. While there are times when you would want a fiscal impact analysis on a development proposal at this stage, but using a model or our model or any model, it's not really the correct method. There are a number of different methods of conducting a fiscal impact analysis, a couple of which lend themselves better to that situation. If you find yourself in that situation, please reach out to me. I'll happily help you choose the appropriate method and guide you through that process. But OKI's model is designed to test multiple scenarios against one another to weigh their relative impacts. Most applicable uses of the model would be to inform a comprehensive plan update or a focused area development plan. It's also applicable to test multiple options for the redevelopment of a key property, perhaps an underutilized shopping center or a vacant property in a community. A little later, we'll look at the City of Oxford's recent use of the model for just such an occasion. Finally, the model estimates both current costs and revenues of the proposed scenarios for both local or county government and the applicable school district. So I want to highlight what the model is not. It's not an economic impact model, which is something entirely different from fiscal impact. Fiscal impact only captures the direct annual impact to a government and school district's future costs and revenues. Now, here I'll demonstrate the basic methodology of OKI's fiscal impact model. The various methods of conducting a fiscal impact analysis fall into two main categories: an average cost method and a marginal cost method. The fiscal impact model uses the average cost method, which works like this. You take the total amount of money a community spends for a given service, and you divide that by a factor, usually population, but it could be number of students, number of employees, number of average daily trips, what have you, to get an average cost per person or per student or per trip. Then you take that average cost per person and you multiply it by the new population expected to be generated by the development that you're looking at to get the fiscal impact of that development, at least on the cost side of things. Conversely, there's a marginal cost or case study method. This method analyzes the marginal increase in services required by the new development. So as you can see in the diagram, our community employs 4 firefighters. Now, looking at the development proposal, the community's analysis of their current capacity and the increase in service that's required to accommodate that development results in the community determines that they need 2 additional firefighters. This method takes into account any excess capacity of service that the community currently has. So while the community may have 4 firefighters in employment, they may only be optimally using 3.5 of those firefighters. So that extra half of a firefighter is excess capacity, which can be applied towards any new development that happens. The case study or marginal cost method provides a more real-world assessment of the additional costs of the development given the community's present circumstances. However, the average cost method is preferable when comparing multiple scenarios and looking to apply the results more generally. Now, we've determined the OKI's model uses an average cost method, but our model takes the average cost method a little bit further. Instead of basing the projection on just one factor, like population, we use 7 different factors. You can see the factors that we use in the green box on the right. Using multiple factors gives a more complete picture of the land use properties driving fiscal impact. Now, when you use multiple factors, that means the model has to appropriately weight the impact of each factor. And to do this, we've used data from 77 communities in the OKI region that span all 3 states. Now, as stated earlier, the model estimates both revenues and costs associated with each scenario. Additionally, these are broken down into several categories to give a more nuanced picture of the impact. Let's focus first on the revenue side of the ledger. Here, the model shows how each scenario would affect property tax, income tax, and sales and hotel tax. Additionally, the model estimates changes for charges for service, fees, fines, and forfeitures, and intergovernmental and miscellaneous revenues. I'll note that some revenues are not estimated by the model, namely revenue from interest on investments held by the local government, donations received, and certain grant income. These aren't included because land use change does not affect these revenue streams. Now, on the cost side of the ledger, we have broken the outputs into 6 general categories of local government spending: public safety, infrastructure, public health and welfare, community development, parks and recreation, and general government. Now, also here, I must note that infrastructure includes spending on roads and bridges, but not water and sewer projects that are supported by tap fees or the sale of water. It's true that development has an impact on these fees, but the impacts are not always neatly housed within local government's budgets. And besides, these enterprises already have models they use to gauge future financial impacts from development in their service areas. So we encourage any community to confer with their water and sewer provider during any planning process. Now, as we touched on earlier, we've learned that the most successful application of the fiscal impact model is to test the relative fiscal impact of multiple scenarios. This is primarily done as part of a planning exercise before a developer is even in the picture. This tool can provide valuable information that allows a community to home in on a preferred land use strategy and understand the trade-offs between different land uses specific to your community. Also, we've shifted away from a web-based model. There are a number of reasons for this, all of which allows us to provide better service to communities using the model. We will confer with you through every step of using the model to ensure that the results are applicable to your study. Make sure that every question is answered and that you have the proper context to apply the results in a useful way. Also, being involved at this level, we'll better see whether the model is meeting your needs and ensure the tool is providing the most benefit it can. And lastly, the changes we've made to the model, including eliminating the costly website, allows us to make this service available to local jurisdictions at no cost, which is, I'm sure, a big, important factor in it being available when you need it. Now, I'd like to bring on Sam Perry, Community Development Director with the City of Oxford. Sam approached me earlier this year as I was developing the revised model, and he was looking to gauge the fiscal impact of a number of development scenarios for a property in Oxford. The timing worked out well that we could use Oxford scenarios as a real-world test of the model. So we've invited Sam to provide his perspective on the usefulness of fiscal impact analysis in the planning process and how their application of the model in their work on the Western Knolls property went forth. So Sam, take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Glad to have you, and big thanks to OKI staff for the timing on this. It worked out really well for us. So a little bit of history on how we got into this. We had kind of struggled with informing our department heads and elected and appointed officials on how to vote up or down on zoning and annexation requests. And whether it's really a good idea to move forward with a rezoning, for example, and really didn't have a lot of guidance in our code, and we're kind of looking to that original fiscal impact model and kind of waiting for, okay, how do we inform folks on, do we need more services that are funded by general fund to account for this rezoning that might turn into an impact that's concerning that we may not be able to handle. So fast forward several years later, and now we have the opportunity, and it just so happens the city owns some land, and at a time when planning is not something that's well understood by citizens and at some points elected and appointed officials. So sort of the because we plan idea that we've been using with Ohio APA as well is, how do we actually show people that we want to utilize long-range thinking when it comes to decision making. So if you want to go to the next slide, there's a property that the city of Oxford became the owner of through a settlement that actually was, ironically, through a rezoning process where we downzoned the property and ended up buying it as part of the settlement. And because of how much we paid for it, we haven't really been able to get it sold. And so it's been sitting vacant for over 10 years. So I had started a program to do the World Town Planning Day design charrette, and this was our second one. So we actually wanted to have multiple scenarios, didn't realize that the fiscal impact model was going to be something that would be looking at that same exact thing. And so through our World Town Planning Day design charrette, which you've probably heard of in the area, and it's kind of a common approach to getting people involved in decision making, we actually came up with several scenarios, actually 5 scenarios. All of them were mixed use, combination of mostly residential, but of different densities. And so as a result of that, we were able to convert those into square footages of different types of buildings and land uses, and also an acreage breakout. And we did make a lot of assumptions, and it did take some staff time, but it wasn't to the point where it was not feasible. So we did have to put quite a bit of time in it. And sitting down with Andy back in, I think it was before the pandemic, actually back in February, when we sat down together and talked about this, it turned out that it was something that we could do. Economic impact was also something we were interested in, but that wasn't part of the scope. Andy also touched on the enterprises. And so, I think as we work with citizens and elected and appointed officials, we need to help them understand that those revenue sources are feeding different parts of a city operation, and in some cases, school district as well. So going to the next slide, we were able to take the results of that design charrette, which we spent over a half day on, and convert that into a publication, which we've got out on the web now. And there's what you see in this publication is nowhere near the amount of detail that was in the model, but we were able to extract out in a graphical way something that showed the elected and appointed officials that there is a difference in this land use mix on the site, depending on how the square footages are between high density, medium density, and we actually had a senior center relocation, new building, more of an institutional use in the project as well, and they could kind of see the comparison. All of them are net deficits on the fiscal impact for the city budget, but that's common for residential. So this really helped us to give more credibility for, okay, it's time to maybe think about lowering the price. We want to see something happening with this property. So we were able to combine that with some, and go into the next slide, we were able to combine that with some examples. And this is just one screenshot of one of the 5 different land use mixes to give credence and credibility to taking action on the property. So knowing that there was some baggage, if you will, with the neighborhood on keeping a land use from happening that they didn't really want, enough time had passed that we could use the charrette results and the economic and the fiscal data to move us toward a decision. So kind of our next steps and applying that is we are actually in negotiations with, we did do an RFP for that, and we are in negotiations with a developer. And we did get one response. Fortunately, it was someone who had been looking at Oxford for quite a while. It turned out that it was not the full 47 acres. It was only 10 of the 47, but it at least will probably be a catalyst. We're a community that doesn't develop very fast. We're a small college town, not near a metro area. So fortunately, in our case, on land that we owned, just happened to own, we're able to guide the type of land use that we want. And so the model helped us with informing the city council that it's time to do something here. So as it turned out, it looks like it's probably going to be a LIHTC funded perhaps project, senior housing and a senior center. And from there, we hope that it will add more housing for all types. So it was a success for us, and I encourage you to try it. One thing I will say is that it's important to keep in mind that this is not talking about the spending power and that's one thing we put in our publication of if it's residential, that there are ancillary benefits that are going to come from any kind of development. So I think it's important for community members, elected and appointed officials to understand that this is just one part of the decision-making process. It's not the full picture. So that was a good takeaway for us. So thanks for the opportunity, Andy and everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for sharing your experience and how you've applied the model in Oxford. It's a great example, I think, of how we envision the model being used to help inform decisions. So thanks for sharing. Just a reminder, we will have time at the end for questions. So please use the chat box or the Q&A feature on this webinar. Type in your questions. That way they'll be in the queue. We'll address them. And then we'll also open up the mics when we get to that portion. You'll have to raise your hand and we'll unmute you and be able to take some verbal questions as well. So you can be thinking about that. I'm going to wrap up today's presentation with explaining how you or your community can take advantage of this service and have the model used for your community. The first step that we ask you to do is submit your interest to us online. And you can access that entry form, that submittal form on the OKI website. In fact, if you go to the website, oki.org, there's an orange banner at the top that you can click that takes you right to the page that has more information about fiscal impact analysis and has a few simple questions that you can respond to let us know about your interest, your community's interest. We will require that a memorandum of understanding be entered into. This is just a way for us to best manage this program with your community and make sure there aren't any surprises or unexpected surprises with the services. So you know exactly what our expectations are in terms of delivery and gives you and your community an opportunity to ask questions and make sure that you're completely familiar, aware, and comfortable with the services being provided. So there are some terms within that MOU. As we've stated, there's no cost, so there's no payment required. But the terms of the MOU do explain, we can jump to the next slide, there we go, do explain OKI's consultation service in detail. We have, as Andy said, a majority of the community's data already built into the model. However, we will want to verify the data that we have for your community. So we'll spend a little time making sure that we have that information right, answer any questions that you have about that data. If it's a community, if you're a community that we don't have data for, we'll collect that information. It's not a laborious or time lengthy experience, but there's a couple of steps there that we'll need to make sure that we take. and then we'll run the model, and we will deliver to you the results in an interactive report, completely transparent, so you can dive into the details of what the model is saying, ask your questions, again, that's part of the consultation services. We'll walk through each piece of that, make sure everything is clear. So all of that is spelled out in the MOU. The term of the MOU will expire June of next year, June of 21. That's tied to OKI's fiscal year, but it'll renew on an annual basis through 2023. So it's just some formalities there. Again, no cost required from the community, but there is a formal agreement. In terms of scheduling, one of the key things that we're asking for in your submittal form is a time period that you expect to need this service. And that will allow us to schedule communities. We're providing the service, however, we do have limited staff, so we want to make sure that we're able to accommodate your schedule. So if it's something that you need right away, obviously indicate that and explain. If it's something that can wait or something that you're going to fold into your comprehensive planning activities in the coming year or beyond, let us know that as well, just again, so we can help accommodate everyone's schedule as we're providing the service. And expect 2 to 3 weeks for the initial setup. That's really a maximum time period, and that would be the time period required if we didn't already have your community's data. It's going to be much less than that for most communities, but we'll take some time just to get the MOU in place and verify the data that we have in place for you makes sense to you. So that's the schedule. In terms of what you'll receive, again, we'll provide the results and assist you with the analysis of the reporting. And we also have some reporting templates available for your use. You may have noticed the graphics on Sam's slides. Some great, actually, OKI is not responsible for those graphics. Sam put those together, but we thought it was a great job, does a great job in communicating the information. So we'll be having similar templates available to you, to communities as you use the model. So that concludes the presentation. It looks like we do have some questions coming in the chat box. So Andy, if you're ready to jump in on responding to some questions, we can go ahead and go there.
Sure. A couple of questions that came in. First is what data is needed from the local school district in order to measure their fiscal impact? The school district side of the model is fairly simple, much simpler than the community side, because we only use a single factor to measure the costs and revenues. It just worked out that the model worked best with only a single factor. And therefore, we have the necessary data for every school district within the OKI region. So that's not something that a community should or would be expected to provide. On the community side, we have complete data for about 50 communities. We've highlighted 50 communities that we think would be most interested in using the model, or the model would be most applicable to them. So we will maintain that data, and when one of those communities engage with us, it'll be a simple matter of verifying a few key data points, mainly the budget and tax rate info, which is most challenging for us to get good, clear information on. If your community is not one of those 50, as Travis mentioned, there will be a little bit of a setup time, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, for us to gather the necessary data and get you up to running, but it's not that significant.
And yes, he has a question about whether the model can consider impact across multiple jurisdictions. Short answer to that is yes. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that. We would run multiple reports, correct, using multiple jurisdictions.
Correct. So we can run the impact to both the local government budget as well as the county government, and as I mentioned, we also have the school district information. So those would be available. If there is a development scenario that crosses jurisdictional boundaries, we would have to treat that as kind of two separate developments, split along that boundary. But we can easily do that.
Sam, there's a question for you from Brian Eliff. I don't know if you're following along in the chat box. You want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Brian. That was a net negative fiscal impact. Again, that doesn't account for things outside the scope of the model, which would have been the spending power of the residents, which would benefit the businesses in the community, but not necessarily the city budget. And then also, of course, the enterprises of water and sewer are not factored as well, or any other utilities the city might own. So it was a net negative, and you can download the publication, or we can send it to you to kind of look at all of that. But the one slide showed everything in the red. It's just that one of the scenarios, the one that actually had more of the commercial or office space in the senior center, was the least amount of net negative because it had a little bit less on the residential side. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. Andy, in the question and answer,
yes.
Dan Johnson, minimum site size. I assume there's no maximum. That's correct.
No, there is really no minimum or maximum site size. You know, the main application of the model is to test multiple scenarios. So it really lends itself to looking at larger or more complex developments. You know, the model can be used in a general way to test one land use versus another, and to get a specific read using a community's budget on what the relative impacts of multiple land uses would be. That would be kind of how it would be used in a comprehensive planning process. But there's no real theoretical minimum. As far as maximum, we've never run the impact model on a scenario that encompassed the entire community. It's something I've thought of, and I don't know if that would do something like break the space-time continuum or cause the universe to spin out of control. I'm joking, but you know, it's something that could theoretically be done, but we've never done it to see how the model would react to that.
Great, Dale. That's a good question. Just about the focus of the model, whether it be for new development, major land use changes, or can it also apply to infill redevelopment in a community that's built out? And the answer there is yes, absolutely. Yes. They could be applied to either of those situations. So the example used today in Oxford obviously was new development, but the model has data on all land use, existing land use in a community. So any changes in that, if that's infill, can certainly be measured.
Right. Any infill, brownfield development. So the model works by testing the proposed scenario against the existing scenario. So we input what's existing on the property, and if that's a vacant property, we input it as vacant. But if it's a disused shopping center that still has a few tenants going in it, we input that, and it gives the relative fiscal impact, you know, as if you're lifting that development out and replacing it with something else. Another interesting use of the model that I've come up with is, say you're a community that does it doesn't have any development going on, and you're built out, the model can be used by, instead of changing land uses, by changing demographic factors, you can test the fiscal impact of the aging of a community over time. So you can run the model on today's scenario and then run the model what you think the demographics of the community will look like in 20 years and 40 years, and see how the changes in population, changes in age demographics will affect your costs and revenues over time.
Charlie Cleaves is asking about payroll tax being included. It absolutely is. Thanks for the question, so we can clarify on that.
Right. So payroll / income taxes is included and is a factor in those communities that collect it.
Bob Jonas is asking about the appropriate application, smaller scale, larger scale, all of the above, countywide comprehensive planning efforts. I think we've touched on this with other questions. A question probably came in before we had an opportunity to clarify, but answer is yes, it can be customized to your needs, your community needs, and absolutely scalable. Jack Sutton's asking about TIF districts. That's a great question. We didn't touch on that, but have the capability to.
We do have the capability in the model to model different TIF districts, and that's where we would need more information from the community to get the background information on any TIFs that they already have, and then the details of their proposed TIFs. But that is something that the model can do. It really just takes the property tax that would be received and places it in another bucket, the TIF bucket, based on the particular details of the TIF.
It's something like the school district impact we learned through managing this model over the last decade. The early version did not address TIF. A lot of questions from communities that have TIF districts in place that needed for the model to consider that. So yeah, the 2.0 absolutely has that capability. So thanks for the question. Sorry we didn't touch on that in the presentation. We probably should have. All right, well, I think I think that gets us to the questions. Looks like we've got some contact information from Dan. Thanks, Dan. We'll be in touch. If you want to go to the final slide, Andy, cue that up. That's got your contact information. Of course, you can find Andy on the website, but there's his email address and direct line phone number. We really appreciate everyone's time and attention today and for participating in this launch. We're very excited to be able to offer this service to the region and to be able to offer it at no cost. So let us know if you have questions, follow up with us at any time. Go to the website, oki.org, click the orange banner and fill out the short form about your interest and your community's needs. We'll follow up with you quickly and make sure that we're here to accommodate those needs. Andy, any final thoughts? Sam?
Yeah, just if you have any further questions, please reach out to me at my email and I will get back to you.
Okay, well, I think that that concludes. It looks like we've exhausted the questions. So thanks, everybody. We'll let you all go and we'll look forward to working with you in the future.
Take care, everyone.